Well, hi, I'm Bey Logan, and welcome to the Hong Kong Legends DVD release of Project A. And you know, I was thinking that of all the films I've done commentaries for, apart from the Bruce Lee titles, this is probably the most important, the most groundbreaking in the history of Hong Kong action cinema, and especially in the career of its star, Jackie Chan. Because the film came at a time when Jackie really needed to boost his career in Asia. His second film for Golden Harvest, Dragon Lord, had kind of underperformed at the domestic box office. And he was gradually making the shift from martial arts movies like The Drunken Master, Snake and Eagle Shadow kind of film, into martial arts action films with the emphasis more being on stunts. And they began the shift with Dragon Lord, but perhaps because Dragon Lord very much looked like a period martial arts movie, audiences were kind of expecting the same kind of stylized martial arts kung fu fight scenes, and the film obviously Dragon Lord doesn't really deliver that style of action. So now with Project A, he came up with something where he would actually bring martial arts movies back to Hong Kong. Because actually most Hong Kong martial art movies were never set actually in Hong Kong. They were set in China in the Ming-Qing dynasty period. And they used to shoot on the backlot at Shaw Brothers and Golden Harvest and pretend it was China. This is one of the very first Hong Kong period action films actually shot in Hong Kong that's meant to be in Hong Kong. And this was the inspiration for the film. Jackie himself was unclear what specifically made him decide to do a pirate movie. One explanation that I came up with was that Robert Clouse, the late great Robert Clouse, who directed the Bruce Lee film Enter the Dragon, had also directed Jackie's American debut, Battle Creek Brawl. And he had a 2-film deal with Golden Harvest to develop films for Jackie. And he wrote one script, which was the original version of The Protector, which was actually, in its content, a lot more like the Cynthia Rothrock film China O'Brien that Clouse would later direct for the company. And the other was a pirate movie called Blood Island. And in that film, Jackie's character was going to be an orphan Chinese youngster who's raised at an English country mansion. And eventually, when he comes of age, sets sail to find his real parents. And the ship he's sailing on is overtaken by pirates. And they land at this pirate island. And this leads to this big swashbuckling adventure. And I wonder if, during the course of making Battle Creek Brawl, if Robert Clouse had not pitched him this idea of doing a pirate film, and this had stayed in Jackie's mind, and so therefore when he came to think about updating his style, rather than going full bore and doing a contemporary martial arts film and really dealing with the challenge of bringing martial arts into the contemporary environment, he thought it'd be interesting to do a film set in the early years of the British colonial administration of Hong Kong. Now, I've read different reviews and stories and books about this film, and the actual time setting, I mean, people said it from the late 1800s to the early 1900s, and it is problematic because we're now shooting, the scenes that we're seeing now are actually shot on location in the Marine Police headquarters in Hong Kong. And in the film, Jackie actually plays a member of the Marine Police. And the Marine Police Force was set up in 1846 by the British colonial administration to fight smugglers and pirates in the waters surrounding Hong Kong. Hong Kong's main benefit to Great Britain was as a natural deep water harbour and as a trading port. So if there were smugglers and pirates operating, that obviously diminished its value. So the Marine Police was set up. So that means the film must be set after 1846. And in the movie, the Marine Police are actually operating out of Central Police Station. I mean, for those not familiar with the Hong Kong geography, Central is actually on Hong Kong Island, and it's a major area of commerce now, and it was always one of the major centres of life in Hong Kong from the very beginning of the colonial era up until the present day. So in the film, there's no Marine Police headquarters yet, and the Marine Police headquarters was actually built in 1884. So that means the film should be set between 1846 and 1884. But then, the main standout stunt sequence is Jackie falling from a clock tower, which is the Kowloon Canton Railway clock tower, which wasn't built until 1915. So that means the film would have to be post-1915. I think what really happened is Jackie, and at least Golden Harvest, employed a whole team of researchers to come up with background for the film, and they took the best elements from their research and were not really overly concerned about setting it at an exact time and place. What is important is it is Hong Kong, and it is round about the turn of the 18th to the 19th century, the last century. And the other reason this film is important, I mean, and most of the key players are actually in this room we're seeing now, which is a set built at Golden Harvest Studios, is the first time Jackie really put together his Jackie Chan stunt team with a view to their being able to realize the ideas he had for extravagant stunt sequences. And there's Yuen Biao making his entrance. Yuen Biao, veteran fans will know this, but I'll just update you anyway. Yuen Biao was one of the fellow students of Jackie Chan and Sammo Hung at the Peking Opera Academy of Sifu Yu Jim Yuen in Hong Kong, and was himself was being groomed by Golden Harvest at this time as an underdog kung fu hero. So his character, his on-screen persona, was actually quite reminiscent of that of Jackie's. So when they cast him in Project A, obviously you didn't want to have him playing like a competitive character to Jackie, so he's cast against type as a very stern Hong Kong police officer. Yuen Biao's birth name is Xia Ling Jun, and he took the name Yuen Biao in respect to his sifu, Yu Jim Yuen. So contrary to modern myth, he's not actually related to all the other people you might have heard in the Hong Kong film industry who are called Yuen, like MC Yuen and Yuen Kui. Gentleman talking there's Billy Tong. He himself, Tong Yin Zan, was groomed by various film companies to be a martial arts star in his own right. You can see him opposite Jackie in Young Master. He starred in films like the Bruce Lee classic, Jyutping the Claws, and he never really came into his own as a kung fu movie star in his own right, but was used to good effect in supporting roles like this. The gentleman there you saw talking on the left is Paul Wong, and Paul Wong was at that time the mainstay of the Jackie Chan stunt team. He was like Jackie's number 2 man on the group, and I think he's actually in this film more than anybody else than Jackie himself. And as we proceed through the film, I'll point out his various appearances. And he it's interesting to note that Jackie is still going strong, but most of the stunt team members who we see working on this movie have actually moved on to other things. And here's Isabella Wong, and our leading lady. It's a very Hong Kong male moment. The guys are allowed to insult each other, but heaven help any woman who steps up. Not the most politically correct moment in a Jackie Chan film. Isabella Wong, somebody came in from doing beauty pageants, and then as now in Hong Kong, if you are a pretty girl and you come out into the scene either as a singer or as a model or a beauty pageant contestant, you'll probably get offered a chance to make films. In her case, she came in and she's in Project A, and she has a cameo in Project A Part 2, but she didn't really have much of a career beyond that. And these two, giving their little Gilbert and Sullivan number, are very familiar faces to anybody who's seen any number of Hong Kong films. The gentleman on the left is called Typo. His real birth name is Cheung Ka-nin, and he's always working in Hong Kong martial arts pictures, but very rarely doing martial arts fight sequences. You can see him in Ninja and the Dragon's Den with Conan Lee. You can see him in Dragon Lord with Jackie Chan, and he's frequently a member of Sammo Hung's stock company of players. He is obviously getting on in years now, but recently won the Best Supporting Actor award at the Taiwanese Golden Horse Awards for his performance in a film called Taxi. So he's matured from being somebody doing supporting roles like this to being a supporting player, a good quality character actor in his own right. You look at Jackie here in some of the close-up shots. It's extraordinary to look and compare his appearance now with when he was actually working as a stuntman in Hong Kong films. Because when you do see him in the old days, it's hard to imagine that he could be considered to be a leading man. But when you look at him here, it's hard to imagine how they could have missed him for so long, because he has so much presence and such a great camera face. The guy on the left is Mars, who's being pulled away there just on the left of frame. Mars is his Chinese name is Forsing, which literally means Mars, the planet Mars, that is. And his Chinese name is Zheng Wenfat. That's his real Chinese name. And I've told this story before, but it bears repeating. This is from the mouth of Jackie himself as to why Mars is so called. Apparently, when he was a kid, he had some kind of problem. He had to have an operation on his brain. And the doctors allegedly left behind some metal in his head. And so he would always be the first guy to leap in and do dangerous stunts and behave occasionally in an unpredictable manner. So the joke used to be that he was actually receiving signals from Mars, or it was himself from Mars. So that's how he got the name. And he worked with Bruce Lee in Enter the Dragon. He's one of the guards getting killed by Bolo. That's probably the first time anybody recognized him in a feature role. Subsequently, he's launched as a leading man in his own right by seasonal films in Lackey and the Lady Tiger. But he never really succeeded as a star. He was always better cast opposite Jackie in films like Dragon Lord and as a supporting player. And now is a stunt coordinator. This is a really nice little moment with Beethoven's Fifth playing. The Michael Lai, who did the music for the film, is an old friend of Jackie's, and this film really does break new ground in the way that music is integrated into the plot. As here, it's almost like a musical number disguised as a fight sequence. And this barroom brawl shows how the choreography of this film is going to be very different from what we'd seen in earlier Jackie films. In the days of Snake and the Eel Shadow and Drunken Master, all the fight sequences were made up of these carefully choreographed and very rhythmic exchanges of technique. Whereas here we actually see, and in Dragon Lord there was really no technique, hardly any technique whatsoever. It was more of a brawl. Here we actually see the martial arts being applied, but in a slightly more realistic environment, and in a way that that it kind of halfway between street reality, when obviously people wouldn't be fighting with perhaps with the long exchanges of technique that we do see in this movie. But at the same time, it's not the very carefully choreographed, stylized fighting that we've seen in dozens and dozens of kung fu films up to this point. And Jackie was really looking to break new ground, and certainly this film delivered on his expectations. It was a huge hit. Shot in 1983, released in December of that year, and well over 19 million at the local box office, which made it a huge hit and re-established Jackie as the king of Hong Kong's action films, and indeed of Asian cinema per se, in a position he enjoys up until this day. But probably it's hard now because he's made so many other films subsequently in which he played similar characters, in which the action sequences were similar in tone to what we're seeing in Project A, and he's done, of course, dozens of more dangerous stunts. But to see really what a groundbreaking film this was for local audiences. The film that Dragon Lord had been beaten at the local box office by a film called Aces Go Places, Doi Gai Pat Dong, which is stars Sam Hui and Matt Gar. And I think that the reason that film had been a success was one of the reasons why Jackie decided not to do a full-on contemporary film, because he would have been seen to copy them, because that was a contemporary film featuring martial arts and stunts. This is a terrific scene, by the way. Just the timing and the use of the props, which is another thing that Jackie was doing really for the first time here, to make the setting as much a part of the fight sequence as the technique itself. If you go through the earlier films he was doing, the background was fairly interchangeable. All that mattered was that Jackie was actually relating to his opponent, and the two of them were showing off their technique to the best of their ability. And here, all the way through, it's like a scene in The Great Race, that American slapstick comedy movie, everything but the kitchen sink thrown in. Here, the Hong Kong police in their uniforms, the big white hat and green uniform and the rattan shields. And you also see some of the sepoys, or sepoys, the Indian police who were employed at that time. The reason that they employed Indians was that India, of course, at that time was also a colony of Great Britain. So they used to bring in non-partisan soldiers, in a way, or non-partisan police officers in the person of the sepoys, and they would actually keep the peace with the local Chinese population. Gentleman on the left there, the admiral, is played by Hak Suen, who's an old trooper, a stage actor who went on to have a long career as a character player in Hong Kong films. You can see him opposite Sammo Hung in Carry On Pickpocket. And on the right there is Captain Chi, played by Hui San Quan. Hui San Quan was another character player, started off at Shaw Brothers. His other most memorable film probably is John Woo's Hard Boiled, in which he plays a benevolent triad boss. You can also see him opposite Michelle Yeoh in the film 1 to 7. He won Best Supporting Actor at the Hong Kong Film Awards for his role opposite Andy Lau in the cop drama Lee Rock. And he's now a very popular TV actor. Recently, I believe he suffered a stroke, so I think his career may be over now. But he was really famous for being in a show called Kindred Spirit, which was a long-running TV soap opera. It was like a Hong Kong Coronation Street, and he was the patriarchal figure in that. Had a long career and is seen in this movie. He plays like an antagonistic character. In Project A Part 2, he came back as a rather more likable commander. Him and Isabella Wong bail out Jackie's character at one point in the proceedings. So I guess the events in this film had changed his opinion of Jackie. Here we see the troops massing outside what is supposedly the central police station. And as I mentioned earlier, we're at the end of the 18th century or the early 19th century as the troops prepare to go out into battle. And you can actually see the degree of detail and research that had gone into this film, because not only do you have the white uniforms of the Marine Police, and obviously Jackie and his stunt team have been to actually train with the Marine Police so they can drill in a convincing manner, but all of the other people represented, the British colonial officers and the Hong Kong police, all have uniforms that reflect those that were actually worn during that era. So people in Hong Kong who were watching the movie, of course, would be far more familiar with Hong Kong history than international audiences. They would actually pick up on details like that, and it really adds to the whole texture and quality of the film. The original title of Project A was Pirate Patrol, and it was announced as that. And the reason that Jackie changed it at the last minute was that he was worried about people copying his movies. I mean, when he did Snake and the Eagle Shadow, everybody came out doing Snake-style movies. Drunken Master, they did Drunken-style movies. And so when they were about to tell everybody we're doing a film called Pirate Patrol, he realized that as soon as he came out with that specific name, all the independent film companies in Hong Kong will be using their action stars and making other films about people fighting pirates. And so he called it Project A. There's a model shot there. And again, a sign of the ambition that this film had, because at that in this period of Hong Kong filmmaking, we're really just at the cusp between the old days of the balance between the martial arts films basically shot in the new territories or on the backlots with people doing the Tiger Claw and all the great stuff they used to do in the old Kung Fu pictures, and contemporary cop dramas. Here's the Pipers with Scotland the Brave. I'm not quite sure why they'd be playing Scotland the Brave while the Chinese Marine Police go off. And that was actually composite. I mean, as I mentioned, and there's the model shot again. This kind of ambition, this kind of ambitious shot for a Hong Kong film of this era, for an American picture, would be nothing. But for a Hong Kong movie, it was really a major step forward, because prior to that, really what you saw was what you got. You know, the people themselves were the special effects. And the settings were secondary, really, to the action that was happening in the foreground and the luminous stars that you had in Hong Kong cinema. And if you look closely at the model shot that we saw of the ships blowing up in the harbour, you can actually see the clock tower, which later will play a major part in the film. Gentleman with the beard there, who was leaving, is Hon Yi-sang. And we always used to joke when we saw this film that this gentleman here, he looked like Master Toddy, who was a Thai boxing instructor in England when I was living in England and doing Combat magazine in the good old days. I believe Master Toddy lives in Las Vegas now. And Hon Yi-sang passed away a few years ago. He was a leading figure in the local Buddhist community and was doing some charitable work up in New Territories and was killed. I guess his time had come, but he was killed when a cart carrying some I don't know what was in the cart, but it tipped over and he was crushed to death. He was a prolific supporting player in Hong Kong films, and he actually returns in Project A Part 2 playing quite a different character to the one he plays in this movie. And there's Lei Hoi-san, who's a familiar face, even with the beard, to anybody who's a big fan of Hong Kong martial art movies. Terrifically strong-looking screen fighter. He had a good guy role as a monk in Lau Ga-Leung's 36th Chamber of Shaolin, where he has a couple of duels with Lau Ga-Fai. And he's the main villain in Yuen Woo-ping's classic Magnificent Butcher, where he has an incredible final reel showdown with Sammo Hung. And also, if you see him in the best of John Woo's period films, Last Hurrah for Chivalry, he's the main villain in that. And stripped to the waist, he doesn't have a pretty boy bodybuilder physique, but he has a powerful physique. And he now works on television and occasionally in films as a supporting player. The guy with the shaven head here is a familiar face, but it took me a while to place him because normally when he's working in films, he has a full head of hair. His name is Wan Fat, and he's a supporting player and also now an action director in films. Here's the mahjong scene, cut from the international prints of the film, because I guess they felt that foreign audiences weren't familiar enough with the game of mahjong. And the first player that we saw, who's on the left, this guy now is Wu Ma, prolific director, and his real name is Fung Wu Ma, one of the students of Chang Chit, who went on to become both a director in his own right and also a regular member of Sammo Hung's team. And speaking of, here is the third member of our main cast, Sammo Hung, who, again, needs little introduction just for newcomers to the genre. Let me say he was you'll have seen him as the guy that Bruce Lee fights at the beginning of Enter the Dragon, former Kung Fu classmate of Jackie Chan and Yuen Biao. If we say Kung Fu classmate, they were at the same Peking Opera School. And he's a giant of the industry, physically and literally and figuratively, as a director and as a kung fu actor. Guy with the bald head sitting in the back there is actually a really familiar face. His name, I finally found out his name, is Fung Gin Man. In earlier commentaries, I was always kind of reaching for who this gentleman was. He's been in he must be the most prolific actor ever. I mean, this guy's been in like hundreds of films, more even than Sek Gin. I used to think Sek Gin was the most prolific actor in Hong Kong cinema, but I think it's probably Fung Gin Man. And he was, they used to nickname him as Mahjong Man, because more often than not when you see him in a film, he's playing Mahjong. He's the guy who gets beaten up by Sammo at the beginning of Magnificent Butcher, and he's like the fence in First Mission. Again, just one of those classic actors. And I was asking around for people like Gordon Chan and other people who've been in the business to tell me who he was, and they said they just call him Asok, which is uncle, and they never really knew what his name was. Lurking in the background of this shot is a guy called Tin Gai, who's a regular member of the Chao Xingqi cast of players, and plays the goalie in Shaolin Soccer. And I guess he was like that's him there right behind Sammo, and he's gesturing to people to move aside, wearing a blue coat, walking off now. Tin Gai is his name. You'll see him in Shaolin Soccer as the goalie. Now, some of the stunt guys, there's Paul again, Paul Wong, with his back to us, and next to him is Benny Lai, also billed sometimes as Benny Ko. And they're leading into the fight. As I say, Paul Wong is actually in this film slightly more than Jackie. I mean, he plays so many roles in the whole course of the movie. As I mentioned earlier, this whole sequence excised from the international print because you had to really explain the rules of Mahjong. But I was surprised when we were shooting the film Highbinders that our leading lady, Claire Filani, was very familiar with the rules of Mahjong. And we had actually had a Mahjong match in the film, and she's really a capable player. And I really wasn't aware that there were many non-Chinese who can play, but then that's only one of the many extraordinary things you can say about Claire. And here we have the big payoff. I mean, Hong Kong people, I have to say, you cannot underestimate how much they love gambling. And so the idea that somebody was losing, they totally get the payoff of the scene with this big smack. Here are the back in the Marine Police headquarters, which still stands on what was the old harbour front in Tsim Sha Tsui. And in this film, we really begin to see the unfairness of the situation in Hong Kong, at least from a Chinese perspective, that you had a colonial government who really were lording it over the local Chinese. And most of the Westerners in the film are regarded in a really unfriendly light. And this probably doesn't reflect Jackie's feelings at the time, because I've always found him to be somebody who takes people as he finds them. But perhaps the audience it was aimed at in Hong Kong were an audience who had felt intimidated for many years by the supposedly oppressive British rulers. And so Jackie in the film is really establishing a character that he would return to again and again, most popularly in Police Story, which is this intrepid underdog police officer or law enforcer who's constantly at odds with his superiors for most of the film, until the end when he is proved to be right, that his instincts prove to be accurate. And so in the end he comes out a hero, despite the fact that he's been against the odds for the whole of the preceding film. There's Benny again to the right of the frame in a police uniform. You remember him from Police Story 2, if you're a fan of Jackie Chan films, where he was the high-kicking deaf-mute character. Often in these films, you see stuntmen as supporting players jumping from side to side of the good guys and the bad guys, depending on the requirements of the specific scene. And Jackie probably felt quite rightly that people don't notice, at least his core audience don't know or care. They're really interested in watching the film for the fun value and for the rhythm and energy of the film itself, and they're not like us looking at the DVD. No one imagined there would be DVD where we could go through scene after scene and actually freeze frame and see who was who in the background. We're talking about the structuring of films, and this is another good example. Project A is a film that's structured in such a way that the individual scenes each work unto themselves. And I don't see in Hong Kong filmmaking any great interest or concern in the films as a whole making a huge amount of sense. What's important is that the audience enjoy themselves, and that segment after segment actually will work in and of themselves. So you'll have a stunt sequence followed by a comedy sequence followed by a dramatic sequence. And as long as each one of these works, then the audience will be satisfied, and for many, many years they have been satisfied. And it's interesting to note that the last run of action films out of America have tended to follow that structure more than the traditional way of filmmaking in America, which was that you had a plot line and character arc and a through line that the audience could follow. Now it does seem to be increasingly American action films are a series of action sequences or comedy sequences placed end on end, which the audience enjoy in their isolation. And maybe that's why because American audiences aren't as used to it as Asian film fans, there's been some dissatisfaction with some of the big actioners from the last year, films like Mummy Returns and Tomb Raider. I'm not speaking out of turn. I mean, we all know those films made a huge amount of money, but I don't think they were critically they weren't critically that well received, and in fact the fans themselves seem to have felt there was something missing from the last 24 months of from when I'm speaking now, anyway, the last 24 months of American action filmmaking. Here we are out in the new territories. I mentioned this a bunch of times, but I'll mention it again. When you see Hong Kong movies, normally all you see is the city. And so the impression people might get from overseas, if you've never been to Hong Kong or if you haven't been on holiday here yet, you think it's just a whole concrete urban jungle. The reality is that once you get just a few miles out from the centre of town, you're in Medicine Man country. You're in really a Pacific jungle. I mean, it's like a rainforest almost. And here we are actually up in the new territories, and these playing fields that were constructed during the colonial era were actually laid out for people to play sports on while they were stationed in Hong Kong. So if you ever do come here, please don't think that the whole of Hong Kong is one big city. You can go outside, and there's hiking trails, and once you get out in the new territories, it's really nice. There's Paul Wong again to the back and to the left of Yuen Biao, and he's jumping around from different sides throughout the whole picture. And the uniforms themselves of the Chinese police, this was actually the joking name that the locals had for Chinese police, like we would perhaps call, a London policeman a bobby. They were called Big Hat Green Uniform because they were wearing these broad hats, I guess to protect them from the sun, because you would be out in all weathers, the sun and the rain, monsoon season and in hot sun. You would be out in all weathers if you were a Hong Kong policeman. So these uniforms presumably were all-weather gear. And this is Yuen Biao again, and as I mentioned earlier, he was being groomed at the time as a kind of a new Jackie Chan figure. And in fact, he was even given the stage name Jimmy Yuen Biao, and no one ever actually told him about that. So he thought his name was Bill Yuen. And when American actors started coming to work in Hong Kong, they would sometimes call him Jimmy because they'd seen the posters with his name, and he would look around to see who they were talking to, because as far as he was concerned, he was called Bill. So Jimmy Yuen Biao was cast in films like Knockabout and Dreadnought, and the roles are very similar to the ones that had made Jackie famous in the seasonal films and, in fact, in Young Master. And in fact, he's cast opposite Jackie in Young Master, and once again, they had to try to find a way to differentiate between the two characters. So in Young Master, he plays a much less likeable young martial artist than Jackie is, and his character is really set as an antagonist for most of the film. And here again, he's this kind of martinet police captain who in the end comes onto Jackie's team and they work side by side. But at this stage of the film, he's really cast against type as a really tough cop. I'm not sure if it really works, and the reason for that is he's just so young looking, and it's hard to imagine him being the commander of this regiment of people, several of whom are significantly older than he is. There was one sequence, Jackie always shoots a lot more for his films than you could actually put into the finished movie. Unfortunately, he never systematically logged all of the outtakes, otherwise we could include more of them than we can on the DVD releases. But there was actually, during this whole sequence, when him and his men are being trained by Yuen Biao, there was a sequence shot in like a martial arts training room. It was more like a turn of the century. It wasn't like the old Mo Guan with like the wooden dummy and all that stuff. It was more like a westernized training area with mats, and more like a judo training room. And on the wall are there all these charts showing different nerve strikes and different throws that you could do as unarmed combat. And there was a sequence there where he and Jackie are doing a kind of wrestling display, or, as I say, judo kind of technique. And it was one of the sequences that was cut from the print of the film. And I think all of that material probably still is there at Golden Harvest, but no one's unfortunately got the political or the logistic wherewithal to go in and locate it. But it would be interesting to see all the stuff that was shot for not just for Project A, but for Jackie's other films that never actually saw the light of celluloid. And sometimes you get your best hint of this if you look at the end credits, because he will occasionally put in bloopers into the famous NG reel of scenes that are not actually to be seen in the finished film. This is seen for all the girls out there. I guess it's equal time, because, I mean, there's so many films where girls have to disrobe and the guys do not. And this film, of course, the girls never take their clothes off, but the guys do. So for all you ladies out there, and I know there are some really very loyal fans, female fans of Jackie and Yuen Biao. I've been surprised since I've been in the commentaries getting emails and other communications from female fans. I thought for many years that the only people watching this kind of movie, Hong Kong martial arts action films, were like mad guys like me, were like, these people like myself who need to grow up and living out their extended adolescence. It was like all the young guys between the ages of 16 and 40 and beyond. But in fact, a lot of girls are into the films. And I think one reason for it is that the leading men of Hong Kong cinema seem to have a certain boyish charm that I might, in some ways, is lacking from their American counterparts. Not that there's anything wrong with the muscular, stoic stars of the classic American action film, but for some reason that whole thing doesn't seem to play anymore, and so the Asian stars seem to play better with female audiences than perhaps the other ones do. Another point of the period detail of the film, these grenades. These were the kind of grenades being used later in World War One. But probably people who watch a lot of action movies or war movies are familiar with the round grenades from World War Two. This was actually the earliest form of a throwable bomb, the early grenade form, and here we see it being used. But it just shows the detail, because normally in Hong Kong films there were no end of historical bloopers. I mean, there was really no... You see films from the old days where they're skateboarding and stuff like this. I mean, there was no real attention to detail. It was just the pure entertainment value, or the perceived entertainment value of the film. And it's evident throughout this movie that a whole team had actually researched the era to make sure that the specific details were accurate. Here we are at the Hoover Club. I'm not quite sure. I mean, maybe it's reference to the American president, but the Hoover Club is obviously based on the China Club, the famous club situated in Central and principally for the use of expatriates. And as we see depicted here, local Chinese were pretty much treated as second-class citizens in those clubs. And so, for some reason, they decided not to use the actual name, and it became the Hoover Club. This exterior here on the back lot. And once you've seen a good number of Golden Harvest movies, you'll realize how they've really forced to cut corners, and how to be very imaginative, to find ways to shoot all this action on a very small space they had on their back lot. Very nice interior set here, built at the sound stages at Golden Harvest. I say sound stages, they weren't shooting with sound. And the bouncer here is John Chang. Jung Long, who's a stuntman, became a kung fu actor in his own right. Fans of the genre will know him for Snake in the Monkey's Shadow and Writing Kung Fu, my favorite of his films, where he stars with Bolo. I wonder whether this guy with the bow tie is in any way influenced by Willie Chan, because his mannerisms and the fact that he speaks English. Willie is Jackie's longtime manager, and I'm sure they were always trying to entice Willie to make cameos, something. He's a very shy person, he's never done it. But I did wonder if the guy in the bow tie there was actually a nod to Willie. Going back to John, who's holding them off here. He was in the film Dragon as the nemesis of the Bruce Lee character played by Jason Scott Lee. And he was actually the original action choreographer on The Matrix, but was replaced. I guess there was a dispute over, I think it was over money more than anything else. And Jyutping came on, and the rest is history. But that was his big break in the States, and he's now, I think, going to be working in America again. He's looking for another project to do. In the meantime, directed a film called Treasure Hunters, which starred a former friend of mine, David Leong, and he's somebody who has done the whole range of things, from doing stunts, doing martial arts action films as a supporting player, being a kung fu guy, almost like a semi-Jackie Chan. Obviously, Snake in the Monkey's Shadow was inspired, if I can use that word, by Snake in the Eagle's Shadow. There's one fat with his shaven head. Really totally different appearance. If you see him, you look at him in Crime Story, where he's acting opposite Jackie, and he looks totally different when he has a head of hair. Here in the back room, and there's our guy, the target of their police, Hon Yi-sang. And there's a very similar scene in Project A Part 2, and it also features Hon Yi-sang, where they invade an illegal... In that case, it was kind of an illegal club. This is obviously a legal club that's being used for nefarious activities. And there's a scene very similar to this leading into a big throwdown with the police versus the gangsters. This is the first time we see Jackie and Yuen Biao's characters side by side. Three musketeers, and Jackie really pulling out all the stops in this film, because he'd had this kind of setback with Dragon Lord, the second film he was directed for Golden Harvest, and really decided to bring on everything he could muster. So he invited Sammo and Yuen Biao to work with him. You look at the front of his shirt. I always mention that the humidity in Hong Kong is such that whenever you start fighting or doing any kind of physical motion, if it's in the middle of summer, then your clothes become wet with sweat almost immediately. So you see Jackie's shirt is dark at the front. And this sequence is incredible, because not only for the techniques we're seeing Jackie doing, but this is really the first time we see the Jackie Chan stunt team and the Sammo Hung stunt team, both of them involved in this sequence, doing the kind of reactions that would really make them world famous. Mars getting walloped out of the air by a chair. And the sequences here, whereas previously we had two guys standing in frame and exchanging technique. Here we have the actual motion being a part of like a palette of colors being applied to the screen. So the actual martial art technique itself is not that important. What is important is the way that it blends into the whole. And there's a rhythm also into the way that the shots are performed and also the way they're edited. And Jackie said something very interesting that, that the audience don't know the rhythm's there until it's not there. And then they realize there's something wrong with the scene. But there's some terrific reactions from Jackie and the guys here. With minimal pads on Jackie, you can see, because he's just wearing a regular shirt, so any pad would really stand out. And they're... You know, the more clothing somebody wears, the easier ride they're going to have, because you can hide more pads. And there are a couple of shots. This guy goes down. You can see he actually has a pad on his chest for that reaction. Still a major impact when you're going down. And I can tell you, Hong Kong breakaways are nowhere near as comfortable, if I can use that word, as their Hollywood counterparts. Nor indeed are there as many breakaways available. So for budget reasons, you kind of have to get the shot done on the right on a smaller number of takes. And now the police, this is typical of the kind of conflicts that Jackie's character is in, where he's pursuing, in the course of doing his job as a police officer, pursuing a genuine criminal, and finds himself at odds with his superior police officers. And Jackie looks great in these close-ups, the energy of his character. I mean, you can just see why he, rather than all the other dozens of followers of Bruce Lee, the people who kind of came out after Bruce Lee, why Jackie was the one that really broke on the international market. Because he's not classically handsome, but he has an energy about him that really just leaps off the screen. And again, it's hard to imagine he managed to suffer through all those Lo Wei films and all the other supporting roles he did before finally coming into his own. And I remember watching this film in England at the midnight show in Chinatown. I drove 100 miles from Peterborough to watch it. It was the second film, and I drove back at 3 in the morning, and I was just so full of energy. I mean, the idea that this film could combine all these amazing elements of the comedy, the martial arts action, the stunts, and then trying to tell people, because in those days we didn't have video, we didn't have DVD. Once the film had finished playing in Chinatown, that was it. You couldn't see it again. And trying to tell everybody, Hong Kong films are amazing these days. And people were like, yeah, Bruce Lee, and Bruce Lee Goes to New Guinea. And it was maybe 10 years still after that people were turned on to the fact that's an incredible reaction. Look at the guy come off the chandelier there. And this is terrific sequence here. First time Jackie, I think, was on a wire for this kind of shot since his days as a stuntman, showing the different ways. Used to be you only would be using wires for a very fast reaction shot. Just the flexibility from going back over the furniture. So again, one of Jackie's main points about his what makes his filmmaking special is the use of the location, that he would put all the props in there and then subsequently go in the night before, see what was there, and then that's when he would actually start creating. And look at this, a shot is about to come up. I've never seen so much powder on a guy's face, unless it was Al Pacino in the last reel of Scarface. And look at that, that's your Scarface moment there, that powder coming off the big man's face as he does that dive, or his stuntman rather, I hope, does that dive down from the first story to the ground below. And it's like just one slam-bang sequence. And you can imagine even the jaded Hong Kong audience getting out of their seats and applauding. And it works all the more. It's a very good combination of drama and action, because you set it up so well with the fact that Jackie's at odds with his commanding officer, so that the payoff is so much more powerful. And the first scene between Jackie and Sammo. And fascinating to see the relationship between them on screen and off. They're two guys who came up together. I mean, as Sammo said, the relationship between them is very hard to define unless you've actually been through something similar. From when they were like 7 years old, they were sleeping together underneath the same dog-ridden, flea-infested blanket at Yu Jimyun's academy, and basically suffering throughout their childhood, not really having a childhood in the proper sense, and then growing up together. Sammo getting into films before Jackie, working as an actor, and then as an action director, and finally as a director. And for most of his career, a step ahead up to this point, a step ahead of Jackie. Then Snake and the Eagle Shadow came out, and Jackie jumped ahead and became a superstar. And I guess because of Sammo's unique image, he was never going to be a leading man to rival Jackie. So it's been suggested in the past that there was kind of a rivalry between the two. But if there was a rivalry, I think the audience benefits, because It's like the grand old men back at Disney who were outdoing each other, and we got the audience got to see the greatest animation ever seen. I think the problem nowadays is a lot of these rivalries are fought out in the gossip pages in the newspapers, whereas any rivalry here took place on the backlot at Golden Harvest, with these two great filmmakers trying to outdo each other with amazing martial arts action films. And I think that period of Hong Kong filmmaking is my favourite. That whole run of films from Hapkido through until probably the last great Hong Kong action. Maybe Pedicab Driver wasn't a Golden Harvest film, but you got to the end of an era at Golden Harvest when Sammo had left, Yuen Bu had left, Jackie remained behind, but the studio wasn't maintaining that kind of volume of filmmaking. And that was, to me, my favourite era of Hong Kong filmmaking. This sequence here, influenced by the opera training, you see them wearing, Jackie and Sammo have disguised themselves. They're wearing these kind of black nighttime ninja outfits with these very bright opera masks. The routine that they perform when they get on the boat is not from the Cantonese opera. It's actually from the Beijing opera, very old Beijing opera, which they would have learned. I mean, both of them, if you ever work with them on a film, both men, both Sammo and Jackie, they know loads and loads of opera songs and folk songs, and they can burst into tune at a moment's notice. And of course, their timing is such they can sing opposite each other or perform opposite each other. And they really don't need to rehearse or anything, that the timing is there after all these years of comradeship. So this sequence really scored by Michael Lai with the opera beats, and it's really playing to the fact that these guys have come in from an opera background rather than a kung fu background. And it has to be said that most of the generation of guys that were coming out in the 80s who were really making a mark were opera trained, either as directors or leading men or as action players. They were really opera players more than they were kung fu people. So these lines, the reason, of course, they're doing it is that they're opposite. This guy on the right is the commanding officer in disguise, so Jackie must never reveal himself. So they're actually singing the dialogue so that he doesn't realize who they are. And audiences, of course, in Hong Kong get a different level to this than the audiences do in the West, because the audiences in Hong Kong are familiar with the fact that Sammo and Jackie were both members of Chut Siu Fuk, which was an opera performance team, and, of course, would be familiar with the original opera that they're riffing on. And so they get, like, an added enjoyment above and beyond the fun that we get with this very physical sequence with the guys stealing the guns. And when they hide the guns out in the where the logs are, this kind of log yard, it's another chance to see the range of locations available in Hong Kong, because I think most people, like, as I mentioned earlier, really think of Hong Kong as being either the city locations where you see cops and robbers films, or the countryside in the New Territories where you used to see all the kung fu movies. But we're seeing this at night. Later, when they come back, you see this vast log yard out in the New Territories, and it shows the range of locales that are available to Hong Kong filmmakers. And I think it was just because of budgetary constraints during the 70s, they really didn't have the wherewithal to go and have major locations powered and lit that were too far away from the studios. This is what's left of a much longer sequence. Originally, they get found out by the bad guys and chased to that brothel. We saw a brief shot there of Jackie coming out of a bath. And this sequence here is actually set in a house of ill repute. And what's going to happen here is that Jackie originally would come out, see Sammo apparently about to do a deal with the bad guys. And he comes down to try to arrest them, and there's a big martial arts chase fight sequence throughout the brothel. But it was cut for reasons of length, and a lot of the gags that he'd used in that sequence turned up again in Project A Part 2 in the scene where he and his senior officer, when they're handcuffed together, are being chased around the restaurant hotel area. In that sequence in Project A Part 2, you can see a lot of the gags, guys running along the benches and him pulling away the bench and then falling down, and the thing with the table and the tablecloth. All of that stuff was actually in that sequence and was cut out because was not seen in Project A, because the whole scene didn't really advance the plot and the film was, I guess, running too long. And this is actually probably more interesting anyway, this whole thing with the log. I don't know of too many other Hong Kong movies where they've had a fight in a log yard. This is actually way up on the shoreline in China, right up at the top of the New Territories. And obviously it's a functioning log yard. No one had actually thought to shoot here before, but it provides a really good backdrop for this confrontation. And then for the sequence here, he's saved in the nick of time John Chang there in a very nice gangster outfit. John's great. I mean, this is him in his younger days. I mean, he's obviously time has passed by, but he was a great-looking guy in his young days. It's easy to see why John was cast in various martial arts action films, and less easy to know why he didn't break out and become a star. There's a number of people like him, Chin Siu Ho, Billy Tong, who I mentioned earlier, who had the looks and the moves. But there's only, at any given time, I think there's only one guy who really jumps out the pack, and at that time, everybody was trying to be a light-hearted martial arts action star, and Jackie was the guy that came out, and Yuen Biao and Sammo kind of also made names for themselves. It was harder for other people. This is in the New Territories again, these old, in one of the old village townships. This is actually, the whole village area here is actually the Chung family, Chang or Chung family's village. It's been demolished now, but at the time it was still standing, and they could actually come in, and a lot of the rooms were empty because of people moving into the big city. So there are a lot of townships in the New Territories that no longer have anybody living there. They're uninhabited. So you could come in and redress the set to suit yourself. This is Jackie's home, so I guess we can imply from this that his character in the movie is an orphan, or certainly he's not married, has no visible relatives, and you see around him all of the background of his life. I mean, it's very Chinese style. There's some opera props in one wall, a chart showing kung fu moves, which looks to be the same as the famous Lam Sai Wing chart showing the Fu Hok Seng Ying and all the different kung fu style of Hong Kyun. Those were the first ones. Lam Sai Wing, who's the character played by Sammo Hung in Magnificent Butcher, who's my real-life great grandmaster in the Hung Gar style. He was the first person to kind of put the system down on paper and do illustrations showing a move-by-move of how to do kung fu. And you see this chart in the sequence that's coming up. You actually see the chart on the wall explaining, I guess, why a member of the Marine Police, such as Jackie, has such ability in terms of kung fu and an opera. But this is a super little sequence here. I love Sammo's reaction when he comes out and he says, you know, you betrayed me for a kiss, I could have kissed you. Where is he? And I love this. He walks around. He's right there. I love the way Sammo just walks out. Lei Ho yeah. They're like, you know, you're really great. You know, that Lei Ho yeah is kind of literally means you're really great, but the real meaning of it is kind of like, you know, oh yeah, wise guy, how dare you, that kind of thing. It's one of those kind of Cantonesisms, doesn't really translate very well into English. This is another super little fight sequence coming up here. The fights in the movie are really short and sharp, but I guess that's what adds to the impact. And particularly at this era, most of the film sequences, there you see the rings, the double rings. Obviously, Jackie's character, as well as doing opera and kung fu, was something of a gymnast. And you see the chart on the wall briefly there behind the weapons rack. Nice POV shot there, punching into camera. Trying to find new ways to show martial arts on screen. I mean, this is quite a challenge when you consider by this point in Hong Kong film history, 1983, they'd been making hundreds of films. And also, for the first time in a Hong Kong period martial arts movie, really coming to terms with guns or gunplay, with people having handguns, and the fact that there was gunpowder, and the fact that you wouldn't be able to overcome any opponent using traditional Chinese martial arts skills and empty hand, or even like a sword or a spear, that there were people with guns, and looking at the ways in which you could make it realistic that people could still execute martial arts fight sequences, even though we do live in an age of firepower. In the old days, the nearest you came to that was in the films at Shaw's, where they looked at the era of the Boxer Rebellion, when the boxers, the people who followed the boxer cult, were taught they could actually be invulnerable to bullets. And they're obviously not looking to explore that area here. It's more like the agility of the performer's concern keeps them one step ahead of being shot. But it does give an extra level of threat. No matter how good you are at martial arts, there are guys out there with guns. So you do tend to feel that there is a genuine danger to Jackie and his other heroes. So Sammo steps out of the sequence, true to form, as this kind of lovable rogue, and Jackie gets lumbered with saving the girl. And he certainly gives poor Isabella Wong a good workout here. The sequence happens here when he goes down, and then she doesn't want to jump, so he kind of tells her to jump, because if she doesn't, she'll be captured and turned into a hooker by the pirates. I think, I was watching the movie and slow motioning and doing all the stuff we do prior to doing the commentary. I think she does this jump herself, but for some reason, after they pull away, they don't actually do a tight shot. It's showing her. I think it's a shame. This is a clever shot here that almost works. If you look at the smoke texture at now, It just changes, so you can tell there was a cut. But otherwise, it almost works. This walled, this old new, this is a real New Territories township here. It's not a backlot. There's John again on the bicycle. That's not on the backlot. It's a real town out in the Zhuang family town in the New Territories. And so you do get to see those narrow walls and walled streets, these little back alleys. This is actually jumping across. This is actually on the setting of the university in Hong Kong. It's a Chinese university. And obviously they were shooting on a Sunday or when all the students were away. Wire shot there of Jackie going up the side of the wall. Something that again, was groundbreaking. You didn't really get to see that a lot. And they go from here, using the topography of this very colonial and intricate quadrangle to give her a challenge in terms of chasing and racing. And this is the kind of thing that really moved the industry along from the straight action sequences. Shifting again, this is back in the New Territories, find somewhere that he could pull her down, and she gets to show some leg, which I suppose is to make up for the male flesh that was on scene on display earlier in the film. Here, they're hiding out. This is actually on the back lot at Golden Harvest. So they've got this place. All those things you see there actually being burnt will be burnt for funerals as presents for the dead in the afterlife. Very unique Chinese custom. So he comes out from there. That's why they would have a dummy in there of like this dummy that they're going to pull the head off. The reason you'd have that there, ready-made, is it would be burnt as a servant for somebody who died in the afterlife. Great reaction shot from Rivers doubling for the commander. For this old guy, Hoi San-Kwan. He's a terrific actor, and I mean, he was always a lot of fun. I mean, when Westerners, friends of mine worked on the TV series with him, he used to be sitting there. He liked to have a pot of tea in the evening. He liked to have a beer or 12, so he'd be sitting there holding court, but never affected his acting performances. He was always a wonderful character player, and we get this great gag here with the handcuffs. And again, you look at the fact that Jackie, in terms of doing Project A, was looking at all the different attributes that would be available in a movie shot round about the turn of the last century, and ways in which he could have fun with them. So you've got things like bicycles, you've got handcuffs, you had those kind of Luger-type pistols, you had the long hand grenades. It's almost like going through the whole of this new. There was a new playpen full of toys that he could play with on this film that were not available if he was making a film back in the days of yore in ancient China. So he was going to use as much as possible and throw in everything but the kitchen sink. So we get this great number here that the commander's handcuffed to one of his officers. And then this chase sequence begins for real. And I remember Jonathan Ross saying this was his favourite scene for Jackie's movies, or certainly from Project A, and I would agree. It really is a masterpiece scene. So let's go through it. This is the wonderful mix of silent comedy. Here's the great gag that was used in the last Indiana Jones movie to date. Borrowed, I suppose, by Steven Spielberg, and why not? Paul Wong opening the door. Who is it? Boom. That's Paul Wong there. He gets around. You see it. He was the guy opening the wooden door in the wall there. That's the most full-on use of a bike, I think, in this whole sequence. Now, you see Johnny Chang is the guy coming out, riding up behind him. This another guy takes the spittoon in the face. And then here's Paul Wong again as he comes out with the ladder. And you needed him because he's going to do a stunt. As they turn around, bang, he's going to do this whole thing here. And then back again, use of the pole, boom. And the Jackie Chan stunt team really getting their first major workout in a movie which doesn't involve martial arts fighting per se. Now, I'm going to break hearts. I don't think that's Jackie right at the top of that arc when he swings the bike. I think he's billed a little too heavy to pull that off. I think it's Yuen Bu, and somebody else said it was Mars. So use the freeze frame. Maybe it's Jackie, use the freeze frame, but I looked at it a bunch of times and I actually think it wasn't him. And people have always, there's always this issue when you're doing commentaries about Jackie films. Do you play along with the whole thing about he all does all his own stunts, or are you more realistic? And I feel he does enough of his work here. Now look at this. This is a tricky shot. Sammo comes up, speaks, the guy has to move aside, and then the bike comes thundering down. It's one of those little incidental things you don't notice, but if you look at that again, just go back and rewind and watch it a couple of times. The timing you need to have Sammo come up and deliver the line and Jackie come in at just that moment. Look at these guys. Boom. They really go to town. But going back to talk about Jackie doing his own stunts, to me, it doesn't matter that he keeps himself healthy for the whole... He has to be healthy to complete a whole film. And there are key stunts, of course, where he has been very badly injured. But I myself don't want him to be injured for the sake of being able to say he does every stunt himself. So I think that the truth is he does the more dangerous and the more spectacular stuff himself, and moves that he doesn't look necessarily very good doing, or that he's not satisfied with, or stunts that are really incidental, he might have somebody else do. This is a great sequence, and again, how to use martial arts in a way that we really haven't seen. Short, sharp fight sequence, but again, showing the timing between Jackie and Sammo. In this film, you get to see their verbal timing, their singing timing, their fighting timing. These guys have each other's rhythms down pat, as well they should after all these years of working together, doing opera performances on the stage and training every day. That they're just one unit, and this is the first time in cinema history that we really got to see them working together in this way. A step back and the opera beats again. Boom. Go down and you hear the opera percussion in the background. Great scene. Isabella. I don't know, she looks to me far more attractive in the traditional Chinese garb than she does in the traditional, in the old-fashioned, I say old-fashioned, in the westernized clothing that she's wearing earlier in the film. I think she looks much more attractive now. Here we are on the back lot at Golden Harvest. Very clever camera work, because you have to disguise the fact that the whole back lot was really very limited, and they got away with murder in terms of the stuff that they shot there. So you had to constantly cheat shots. Luckily, you had right behind the old Golden Harvest studios, you had this hillside, so that if you angled the camera correctly, you would see hill and sky. If it had been surrounded by huge tower block buildings, as indeed it is now, then I think you'd have had a big problem, because you couldn't shoot. You could shoot down, but you could never shoot up, and all the shots would have looked very claustrophobic indeed. But here they actually managed to construct the full replica, a kind of a life-size replica of the Kowloon Canton Railway clock tower, which we're about to see. And it was actually built on the back lot. And if you look at the documentary, Bruce Lee the Legend, you see some behind-the-scenes shots of Raymond Chow and Andre Morgan on the back lot at Golden Harvest. And you can see the clock tower either under construction or it's just been completed. And you can see its position in relation to the rest of the studio, which is kind of interesting, because they use a lot of clever shots here to make you believe that we're actually in a much broader township than we actually are in. Great sad day for me when Golden Harvest Studios closed down. First went there to visit when I was 19 years old, which was an incredibly long time ago. And so I really felt a pang in my heart that a piece of my childhood was gone forever. But as Jackie said at the closing ceremony, before something new can begin, something old must end. And many a true word. This stunt coming up, people always talk about the clock tower gag, and indeed the clock tower stunt is really extraordinary. But what's coming up in its own way is probably just as risky, because with the clock tower, I mean, you could actually do stuff to break your fall, and you could actually, when he actually hits the ground's been prepared. But when he actually is forced to go up the flagpole here for a couple of shots, basically what you've got is him, a top shot looking down, and you see him climbing the flagpole, and evidently there's nothing underneath. And so, were he to slip and fall, I mean, the guys below can do nothing to help him, and he really doesn't have anywhere to go to, whereas when he's jumping down the clock tower itself, you can see that there are the awnings, there's somebody standing in one of the windows. But this shot here, I mean, if he would have gone off from the top of the flagpole, that would have been it. There would be no more. There would have been no rush hour, at least not with Jackie. And this stunt here, going across, boom, from the flagpole down inside the interior of the clock tower. And I guess it'll be elsewhere on the disc, but doing the research for this, we actually went to visit the actual real Kowloon Canton clock tower, and I wondered if we would see this wonderful medieval-style contraption, this kind of Heath Robinson stuff going on here, but you don't. It's the windows are around about the same shape, but the box is about the same size as a DVD machine, so, and that's making the clock go around every day. So it was a little bit disappointing. Maybe back in the early part of the 19th century, when that clock tower was being used in the situ at the terminus, this is what it looked like inside. But it provides a terrific setting for this throwdown between Jackie and Lei Hoi San. Lei Hoi San in this movie playing more of a character role. He doesn't really get to show off his kung fu per se. But again, with Jackie, in this film, he was looking at a way to use every environment. And that spin through the air, again, we've seen it a dozen times since then. I think The End of Young Master was the first time that we saw the 360 being employed by Jackie, and we just saw it again. And those kind of 360 reactions, that great twirl there. I love the way that they frame this in the machine. I mean, people probably read all these things into it. That it's Jackie versus not just his enemy, but he's versus the machine, he's versus the new age. I mean, you can read all kinds of things into films by virtue of the way they're shot, and people do. And I look at it and think, well, maybe if you see that there, then it's there, but that's not actually what the filmmakers intended. And definitely in Jackie's films, I mean, his primary intent is to entertain the audience, and whatever message he has tends to be fairly obvious and fairly delivered in a fairly clear manner. I don't know that his films are known really for subtext. Here he is on the rack and being tortured by Lei Hoi-san. And Jackie's never ashamed in his films to be seen as somebody who suffers, because he realizes that the more he suffers in the course of the film, the more the audience is rooting for him, and the more the ending, when he invariably wins out because he's the star of the movie, the more the ending, the more impact the ending will have, because he's been an underdog and had a rough time of it. Whereas if you start the film as an invincible hero, you have nowhere to go. Guy coming in there with the gun is Danny Chow, or Denny Chow. Pay your money, you take your choice. If you call Danny Chow, you're kind of the full cast of The Killer right there, aren't you? Chow Yun-gin. Now, The Clock Tower. Inspired by the famous Harold Lloyd short, Safety Last. But, of course, in that film, Harold Lloyd doesn't actually fall from the clock tower. And the degree to which it's inspired, I mean, this is an issue that Jackie himself has debated. The video wasn't around at the time, so he may just have seen a still of somebody hanging from a clock tower. Danny Chow, member of the Jackie Chan stunt team at that time, and a pretty graphic bit of violence coming up for a Jackie film. When he aimed, bang, you hear, it's the old classic thing, you hear the bang, but he's been shot. Bullet through the head. For Hong Kong film at that time, nothing. I mean, John Woo was already starting to make films. But for a Jackie film, quite some. Paul Wong at the right of the shot there. Want you to notice him because he's in the whole film. Jackie says that he really didn't want to do the clock tower fall until the last moment. And he told his stunt boys, just let me drop, let me fall. Boom, through the first, see the guy there? He would have had some kind of protection had he given up halfway. This is the one that really, is the proper shot. It defies the logic of filmmaking in a way, but the audience goes along with it because he does the same shot, evidently different 2 times, but in reality it would only happen the 1 time. So he was inventing a new style of filmmaking where the audience are kind of in on the gag. They appreciate, hey, I'm doing a stunt, let's look at it a few times. But for whatever reason, they just go along with with it, and justifiably one of the greatest stunts in the history of one of the great stunt performers of our time. And here we are out on the open sea. For a pirate movie, this film spends hardly any time actually out at sea. Here we are actually in Clearwater Bay. This is not actually out on the seas around Hong Kong. And we see the British ship sailing out to face the pirates. And Michael Lai mentioned that he loved doing this film because it gave him a chance to move away from doing just traditional Chinese music to do more westernized music. And he had a great swell of the orchestra as the ship sailed out onto the sea, and there you see all the pirates. It's a shame in a way that Jackie didn't stage an action scene for himself on a schooner, on an ocean-going vessel like this, because it would have been fantastic to see him doing all the Errol Flynn Seahawk stuff, swinging down the gangplank and swinging on the ropes, going down the mast. Here you have, when the pirates attack, you have the Westerners trying to defend, and every time you see a Western guy firing a gun and getting beaten up by the Chinese pirates, it's a Western guy from the front, and then when he does the stunt, it's a Chinese guy in a wig, which is something that Jackie would continue through up until the time he started doing American films, when he was told the unions would not allow you to do that you had to have a black guy or a white guy doubling for a black or white character in the film itself. You couldn't just black up or white up a Chinese stuntman and put a wig on them. You actually had to use a member of the stunt union in the States. So that's when he really started working seriously with American stunt players and seeing the different skills that they had to offer. But here in Hong Kong at the time, most of the guys were brought in from Chungking mansions. They were travelers. So this is a nice shot here. Look at it. It goes up, boom. Look at that stuntman going off all the way down. That's actually probably his hairiest stunt in its own way as coming off the clock tower. Which is why I think it's a shame that Jackie himself didn't come out and do an action sequence on a boat, which I think a pirate movie lends itself to that. And then we could have had a different level of action from him in the film. And I hoped he would do that in Project A Part 2, but actually he's never done a scene like that on a boat. Here's our main villain, Dick Wei. Dick Wei, a former Taiwanese army captain and taekwondo black belt, he was discovered by the legendary Shaw Brothers director Chung Chit I think it was when Cheung Chit was actually making films in Taiwan. At that time, Shaw Brothers movies would be released in Taiwan, but the money they earned could not be taken out of the country. So to use that cash, Shaw's actually set up their own autonomous branch in Taiwan to actually make movies. It was run by Cheung Chit, who was their most famous director of that era. And so Cheung Chit was looking for a lot of local Taiwanese talent to put into films, and he discovered Dick Wei and put him in such films as Chinatown Kid, The Kid with the Golden Arm, 10 Tigers from Canton. And after Shaw's kind of got out of doing martial arts action films, Dick Wei became the villain du jour throughout the 80s. There was the old saying, everybody fights Dick Wei. And even if he only had a small part in a movie, he would come in and really was, as soon as you saw him, you knew he was the bad guy, and you were going to have a great fight with whoever was the leading man in the movie. He fought Yuen Biao in Shanghai Express, Sammo Hung at the end of Paper Marriage. With Jackie, he has a nice fight beyond this movie in My Lucky Stars. He actually played a good guy. This would probably be a good Hong Kong Trivial Pursuit question. In what film does Dick Wei play a good guy? He's in a film called Seventh Curse, which stars Chin Soo-ho and Jiao Yun Fat, and he actually plays a good guy in that, and is very good. So I guess because that film was not a big hit, he didn't get to do more films as a leading man. Had it done better, probably he would have had a more balanced career. And I think he himself became tired of constantly playing bad guys, or actually playing the same bad guy. And he's now retired, living in Taiwan, and our team interviewed him. So I believe the interview with Dick Wei will be available elsewhere on the disc. But I'm just carrying on there talking about his big introductory sequence, which we saw a few moments ago. The character he plays in the film is based on a real-life pirate called Cheung Po Jai. And Cheung Po Jai was kind of the real-life Chinese version of the Pirates of Penzance meets the Princess Bride. He was somebody captured by a band of pirates who rises within their ranks to become the pirate king himself. He's like adopted by his captor as like a Kaijai, or adopted son. And he actually became a pirate king and terrorized the South China Seas until he finally was defeated in 1810, which of course puts his life and exploits way back in time before this movie. The earliest this film could have been would be like 1846. So he was defeated back in 1810 by the Chinese Navy. So obviously, again, somebody researching Chinese history and taking the best elements that they can and putting them together in such a way that you had the best on it. It was like a salad bar or buffet. You actually look at the best available and put it all together on the screen for the maximum effect, and it certainly does that. In all Jackie's movies, I was talking before about the futility of looking at his films for any hidden message. In Jackie's films, I don't see any hidden message per se. What I do see is in every film, there will be an explicit message where he actually gets to say what the audience is feeling, and he understands his audience very well, and so he would really nail specifically their frustrations and their feelings when they're watching the movie, and at a certain point will turn to rail against his superior officer. I mean, there's a scene in Police Story where he comes back and he, at gunpoint, chastises his superior for sitting in an air-conditioned office when he and his fellow cops are out risking their lives. There's a scene in Miracles where he challenges all his fellow gangsters to do the one noble thing that will redeem their lives. Here, he's chewing out this colonial administrator, and you know he means it because the camera zooms in. You always know Jackie means what he's saying when the camera zooms in on him. And so here we have the confrontation between him and the British officer when he's basically saying, how dare you do this, to our Chinese people, and you're giving a knighthood to a guy who's murdered and raped and killed and all these other crimes. And so I will go out and bring the pirate to justice. And of course, it's Jackie Chan movie, and he's so impassioned. Even this cold, hard-hearted Western devil has to go along with what he's saying. By the way, quick tip of the hat to the production design. I mean, really wonderful production design. They came into the Marine Police Headquarters, which even back in 1983 was largely unused. So this redressing of the set was really done specifically for the film. But they have some wonderful detail in the pictures and the charts in the background that you really feel this would be what a commander's office would look like in early colonial Hong Kong. And during this period, Hong Kong films were shot wild, by which I mean there was no actual sound recorded live on the set. It was all dubbed in later. It was relatively unusual for the action stars to dub their own voices. Jackie had a very specific voiceover artist who would give him a voice. It wasn't until, I think, Police Story 3 he was finally persuaded that his voice was actually very good and that he could actually dub his own character in his own films. It was also given at this time that everybody would speak Chinese. It didn't matter whether you were white, Indian, Japanese, or whatever. If you were in a Hong Kong film and you had to talk to the leading man, you would be speaking Chinese unless it was a plot point that you did not. So we saw the commanding officer there speaking Chinese fluently, and of course there were people in the history of Hong Kong, as there are now, who do speak either Mandarin or Cantonese fluently. But in the colonial era, I think it was a matter of pride that most of the commanders did not speak Cantonese fluently or Mandarin, and they would actually force their underlings to speak English. So there was that kind of snobbery of not speaking Chinese. So that's a little bit of unrealism setting in. But you have to bear in mind, this film was never created for a worldwide audience, never shot with the intention that years later we'd be bringing it out on DVD as a special edition, exclusively for like a European or a worldwide audience. So Jackie's main concern was to do a film that his local audience would appreciate. And of course the local audience in Hong Kong, then as now, is primarily a Cantonese-speaking audience. So they wanted to see a Cantonese language film. And it's only relatively recently people have dared to bring in English dialogue sequences into films with varying degrees of success. So up until that point, everything had to be in Cantonese. There's a nice forced perspective shot there. This is still at Golden Harvest Studios, and they built the set that actually gradually... This Yuen Biao, and the nearest thing to drunken boxing we've seen from him, I think. Can't remember any films where Yuen Biao does drunken boxing. I'll say that now, and then everybody will be on the news group saying, well, he did it in this movie. But there he is as a drunken, supposedly a drunken molester, so that we can set the scene up here where Isabel Wong is going undercover, which is actually pretty dangerous. I mean, you know, she doesn't get much to do in the movie, but this is when she shows her pluck, that she's prepared to go into this carriage with this rather smarmy gentleman in the top hat. So she's put in the line of fire to kind of draw him in on behalf of the local police. And then the setting here, very nice. It looks, Jackie's filming at the moment this film Shanghai Nights, and I guess this is the last time prior to Shanghai Nights that Jackie had been in this kind of milieu, because Shanghai Nights is set earlier actually, it's set in like the London of the Sherlock Holmes era, in Victorian London. So you get the kind of the foggy streets and the horse and car, actually was shot on location in Prague, but that probably looks more like Victorian London than London does these days. So you have the carriages and the gas lamps and all that. So you'll be seeing that from Jackie early in 2000, I guess early 2003, whereas here we're actually seeing the same kind of setting, but back in 1983, and there's a big gap between these two movies and the sting being enforced. And then we got the next shot that's coming up. We get a kind of another. I guess the ladies are really going to enjoy it. Is like, you know, Jackie and the guys stripped to the waist to beat up their captive. And again, I mean, it's something that's been I'm glad about, because it's good. The broadest market we can find, the better. But girls, women writing in and saying that they like Jackie, and there was one lady writing to me, huge fan of Yuen Biao, so I guess this will be one of her favourite scenes in the movie. We get to see Jackie and Yuen Biao. Used to be de rigueur in the old days that if you were a kung fu movie actor, you'd perform most of the film stripped to the waist, and if you were in a Zhengjit film, you'd do stripped to the waist and with like a spear in your stomach. But relatively, we were moving beyond that at the time this movie was made in the early 80s. So this is like a flashback to earlier times when you had to stay buff all year round. If you're wearing a uniform, if you're wearing a costume, you can get away with more, as indeed our current crop of action stars do. I mean, the guys that came in the 70s and the 80s did stay in good shape because they were being asked to do much more physically themselves. And also, as I mentioned, a lot of the times they would do their big final scene, Bruce Lee style, stripped to the waist. So if you had a spare tire or two, it wasn't going to look that good. Unless you were Sammo, in which case you could have a spare tire or 12. Here we are, Cheung Chau, and a real fishing village and a real fishing boats used to illustrate the scene. A fantastic outfit for Jackie here. I mean, you know, you couldn't get much further away from the Jackie we all know and love than that little pencil mustache and the top hat. Again, a very familiar backdrop to anybody who's seen a bunch of Hong Kong movies, or specifically Golden Harvest films, because there are key locations that do turn up again and again throughout the history of Hong Kong filmmaking. And again, it's not because there aren't more places available. You need places with ready access for power, for road access. There are some places in the new territories that now we can get to with the use of helicopters and stuff, whereas in the old days, the road access wasn't very good. It was very hard to move, if you were doing a complicated film like this one, it was very hard to move a full cast and crew in to shoot. So you end up getting specific locations used again and again. Jackie, in a pirate movie, finally gets out on the open sea, but we don't get to see any action, and we get this little scene here. Actually, a little bit reminiscent of a sequence in Police Story 3, when Jackie and Michelle are travelling by boat, and one of them's hiding, and here's Sammo. Somebody's hiding in that sequence, and here's Sammo coming up to have his dialogue exchange with Jackie. And it's great, the kind of the animosity here and this kind of rivalry between the characters. And it plays back to the old films. I think that something that's been underrated or underestimated has been the influence that Hollywood has on Hong Kong films. And the reason Hong Kong films have this unique identity that you don't see in Chinese or even in Taiwanese cinema was that Hong Kong was a crossroads, east meeting west. So Hollywood films were playing in the local theatres. So you really didn't just get to see Hollywood action films, but you got to see all kinds of movies, comedies, dramas. And some of the style of that filmmaking brushed off on local filmmakers. So now when you get, in the 80s, the progress of movies going from kung fu movies into action films, you do get stuff like this kind of the acerbic character comedy that you see in the old Dean Martin, Jerry Lewis films, that you see in the comic movies of the 50s and 60s in America. Some of that rubbing off now in a different comic style than the very broad comic style that you saw back in the 70s in Hong Kong action films. I don't know necessarily that 70s action films, the comedy therein played very well internationally, but Jackie's comedy tends to travel very well because a lot of it's very visual, it's not verbal. Nice shots here as we're coming up to the pirate's lair. And I was talking earlier about Chompo Jai, who was a real character, and he had a fortress on the island of Ma Wan. And in this movie, of course, we see a hidden fortress that's been constructed by Dick Wei's character. So again, I think from the research they'd done of famous pirates of Hong Kong, that was something. And here, this is actually, this cave that we're about to see, or caves, because there's actually a number of them that are used for these specific shots, is located on Cheung Chau. Cheung Chau is one of the many islands that surround Hong Kong, and was actually a lair of Chompo Jai, and they actually went to shoot on location. And quite a tricky undertaking, and you can see there's some difficult camera shots here, and they really had to work at it because Hong Kong filmmakers were not used to shooting in the open sea or shooting in marine caves as they do here. But they actually went out on location. Cheung Chau is still inhabited, and a friend of mine lives there. They have people who really want to get out from the rat race, go and live on Lama or Cheung Chau. And then we're back into the soundstage at Golden Harvest, where they put in the rock walls, and they're very similar to the rock walls we see at the end of Armour of God, which was shot a few years later. They're not particularly convincing, but you do actually believe that you're, if you go with the flow, you believe you're in an underground fortress, presumably out there in Ma Wan, which has been built by the Pirate King. And Jackie coming in here to a kind of a frosty reception from the hordes. It's a J. Arthur Rank movie, as the gong is struck. Anybody old enough to remember that, apart from me? The guy standing on the right to Dick Wei there is a Korean martial artist actor, and his name is Kwan Yung Moon, and his Cantonese name is Kun Wing Man. And he goes by the name of Best, so I guess he goes by Best Kwan or Best Kun. That's his English name. And you can also see him in Dragon Lord, where he has probably a bigger role than he does here. But he was also in Tower of Death, and another taekwondoist, one of the many taekwondo players discovered by Sammo Hung over the course of the years and brought to Hong Kong and used to very good effect in the films. I mean, Sammo was always somebody who, when he's looking for a specific style to show off in a film, would look throughout Asia and find somebody who was the best exponent of that style, bring them to Hong Kong, and then make them look as good as they were ever going to look in his films, as he does here. I mean, he was the person that brought in Kwan Yung Moon to be in this movie. Mentioned also about Dick Wei. I was, in researching him for this commentary, I saw that in 1990 he directed a film which was called Visa to Hell, which I'm not sure whether that was like, day trip to Benidorm or something. But I know nothing about the movie, so maybe somebody will write to me and tell me about it. I didn't know that Dick Wei had directed. But he apparently, before his retirement, when he was living in Taiwan, he's an animal lover. He'd had over 100 dogs. He would take in stray dogs. And it goes to something that I've said several times previously on commentaries. The meaner somebody is on screen, the more evil they are, the more nice they are off screen, and the more you might like to hang out with them. Conversely, sometimes the people that you think are real sweethearts, when you actually meet them in real life, you think, boy, I wish you were more like you see him in the movies. I'm not going to mention any names, but I don't mind telling you that Dick Wei, who I know only in passing, but from what people have told me, is a really nice man, and yet has played almost uniformly villains throughout his career. And considering how much water there is surrounding Hong Kong, there's been relatively few pirate movies shot throughout its history. Perhaps the most artistically respected one was The Valiant Ones, the King Hu movie, which incidentally Sammo Hung was the action director on and starred and appears in. And there was a number of other films shot at Shaw Brothers, and then Once Upon a Time in China 5, which was the last of the feature films to star Ju Man-chuk as Wong Fei-hong, directed by Choi Hark, and a film in which he takes on pirates. And there's actually, at the end of the film, the legendary pirate king has a lair that's a rather better dressed version of this one. I mean, the film was made a long time later, but it's basically the same set, which is a cave, the treasure cave of the pirate king, and the setting for a big showdown between Wong Fei-hong and his men and the pirate villains. And nothing wrong with that. I mean, I think that's one of the things that's good about Hong Kong film, is the way that specific ideas do get reinvented from time to time by the fresh talents coming into the business, and that's as it should be. So I'm not of the school of thought that says that somebody ripped off from somebody else or stole from somebody else. I don't think art works like that. I think people actually are inspired in different ways by the same information and the same materials, and then interpret it differently. And that's certainly what's happened in the course of Hong Kong film with regard to pirate films. But as I say, not many have been made, and there's never really been one that went out on the open sea and did the Errol Flynn number, and this film certainly doesn't either. Point to note about the set construction. I mean, these sets are all built by hand. There's relatively little in the way of machinery used to build sets on the Golden Harvest backlot. So you had a lot of craftsmen working there who had really passed on their skills from master to student or father to son over the years, from the early days of filmmaking at the old Cathay studios. And again, it's an example of specific skills that are probably dying out because there are less and less films made, certainly far less films made on location. I always wondered whether this sequence was in part inspired by the Bruce Lee sequence in Enter the Dragon, when he goes out onto the island of Mr. Han wearing the black cat suit. And so they decided to have some fun with it, and again to take it in different directions, as you have all of these guys sneaking around the island at night, mistaking one another. A great bit of visual timing, that kind of humorous encounter. And here they are, this whole posse is like the Bruce Lee fan club comes on their annual outing to Cheung Chau, and they're all in their black cat suits and heading off in their different directions. All these scenes shot actually out in the new territories, and shooting night for night. It used to be in the old days they would always shoot day for night, so you get that kind of green tinted look, but they actually were shooting night for night. This particularly seems to me to be very reminiscent of the sneaking around the walls of Han's castle in Enter the Dragon. But again, you can read stuff into it, but a lot of the times, particularly when Sammo's involved, Sammo, more than Jackie, an admirer of the legacy of Bruce Lee, perhaps because he, in a sense, was at a higher level in the industry when he worked with Bruce Lee. Sammo tends to have more of an even-handed appreciation of what Bruce brought. But Sammo is always referencing Bruce in his films with like a nod and a wink, more than Jackie is. I think Jackie probably has a respect for Bruce Lee and the work that Bruce Lee did and the impact that he made internationally, but he's fed up with people asking him, hey Jackie, who's better, you or Bruce Lee? Because he feels, quite rightly, that he's made his own mark. And I guess it's like if somebody kept asking me, all the time about Rick Myers, who was, the great granddaddy of the Hong Kong, the fans of Hong Kong film, or the experts on Hong Kong film, to spread knowledge in the West. And I love Rick to death, but I don't want to talk about him all the time. And Jackie also doesn't want to talk about Bruce all the time. So that's what I think people have said to me in the past. Oh, Jackie hates Bruce Lee. He doesn't hate Bruce Lee. He just doesn't want to talk about Bruce Lee. And people in Hong Kong would never really ask him about Bruce, but in the West they do tend to, because I think the Bruce Lee legend is probably stronger now in the Western markets than it is necessarily in Hong Kong. Japan, of course, still a big market for Bruce. And here's Sammo. And, you know, he's a strong man, but, I mean, how much treasure is he really carrying in those 2 boxes to make it worth his while? That's the question. And this whole sequence here with the passwords is just wonderful and great slapstick comedy. And you can imagine the guys all getting into a huddle and falling around giggling. I mean, it's a shame that the shooting of behind-the-scenes footage or making-ofs really came in so much later than Project A, because the stuff happening behind the scenes, maybe there is outtake footage, as I mentioned before, there's stuff at Golden Harvest that may show the actual give an insight into the actual working process. But it must have been a lot of fun, because at that time the friendship between Jackie and Sammo, they were working together on the backlot at Golden Harvest, they were seeing each other every day, so there was that exchange of energy on an ongoing basis, and I think it must have been a riot when they were out trying to outdo each other. And I think it was a good kind of rivalry, because each one was trying to be more funny or perform a more exciting, dangerous stunt than the other guy. And here they're trying to outdo each other verbally for the audience's enjoyment. And I think that a lot of the times the communication of the comedy in the old days, you really didn't get the full benefit, because the subtitling of Hong Kong films left a lot to be desired. I mean, I think to this day, I am the only person in the Hong Kong film industry who actually goes into the subtitling house, which is situated, incidentally, upstairs from the studio where I'm recording this. And I will actually sit down there with the guys who normally do the subtitles and write my own subtitles. And the reason I do that is because they're really hard-working individuals, but English is a distant second language. And I'm amazed that the subtitles even make as much sense as they do. Now, of course, at Hong Kong Legends, they have a proper subtitling team. Now, this gag here, I think there's 2 films I've seen this in before. One was an episode of The Goodies, where the Goodies are breaking in somewhere. And if anyone remembers The Goodies, Bill Oddie and the other 2 guys on TV in England. It was a hit show, Ecky Thump and all that. But there was that particular shot, was The Goodies. And also, I think, in the film Help with the Beatles. And I just was watching this film again and thought, where have I seen that gag before? And I'm wondering if it was invented for the first time here, or whether somebody did actually watch on TV a British television comedy show or a showing of Help and thought, hey, that's a good gag, we'll do that. But a good way to get into breaking the guys out of jail, because obviously we've seen dozens of movies where people have been busted out and you're trying to find something different. Here we have the Hall of the Pirate King, his birthday celebration, so it's going to be a big throwdown with all the guys. And you see the big golden Chinese character behind him, behind his chair, is actually Sao, which is long life, so it relates to the fact that he's having his birthday party. And this amazing chair he's in, I mean, I'm not sure what beast of the sea that was, but they brought in the bones to make this throne for the Pirate King. And watching the film for the umpteenth time, I noticed something, and I'm all for Warner Brothers product placement, but there are occasions when it doesn't really fit the bill. And when I was watching Project A in preparation for doing the commentary, I was watching one sequence and I thought, Warner's, the guy on the front left there with Tweety Bird tattooed on his back. I mean that's all well and good, but Tweety Bird in the 1800s, it just doesn't play for me. But make of it what you will. I mean, it's one of those little details I guess somebody threw in there. Maybe it's not meant to be Tweety, maybe it's a skull and crossbones, but it sure looked like Tweety to me. And here we have the all-purpose macho. Notice there's no. He's having a hoedown, but there's no hoes in evidence. You see no women whatsoever here. It's an all-male island. So they're getting down to this macho ritual of arm wrestling. The other Jackie Chan film to feature an arm wrestle as a major plot point would be Miracles, where he arm wrestles for as part of his tests to become the leader of the Hong Kong Triad Society. So nice fetching headgear there for Yuen Biao. I think they probably got more unusual hats for their leading players in this film, in this one movie, than the entire remainder of their careers. Because in the whole course of the movie, everybody gets to wear a top hat, various marine uniform hats. And here's the bad news as Lei Hoi San's character returns, which leads to the comedy of errors that's to follow. But that's part of the fun, I think, of doing a period movie, particularly a period film that's set in this flamboyant part of colonial history, because you do get to try out all these different costumes and looks and styles. Whereas, and they don't date, because, it's already a period piece. Whereas if you look at some of the other movies that were shot in the 70s and 80s, they look terribly dated now, because the fashion that was cutting edge at that time doesn't really work. They got kind of an Austin Powers flavour to them. Whereas films like this, and indeed the old period movies from Shaw's and Golden Harvest, still look fairly contemporary, because our perception of classic Chinese garb is the same now as it was back then, because it's set in history. Look at this, everybody piling on to Sammo, and I mean, you could tell Sammo is the guy of the three who you could actually do that with, and then be undamaged, because he's probably the sturdiest player, certainly in this film, and maybe in the history of Hong Kong film. Sammo, the great thing about Sammo as a screen fighter is, apart from the fact that he can kick and punch with such power and grace for a man of his build, also is the fact that he looks like he can take more punishment than anybody else. And the team here consists of the normal crew of Typo there, Mars on the right, and one of the other guys who's working with them, who plays one of the police officers, is played by Assam, who, along with Yun Duck, was one of the action coordinators on 2000 AD, and I'll point him out later in the movie. He is another stuntman who was brought in and given a feature role. Whereas in Hollywood, there seems to be a really distinct dividing line between people who act and people who do stunts. I mean, a friend of mine, Mark Hicks, who worked on Gai3 Waak6, he's a fine actor, but he's been a stuntman, and it's not as common as it is in Hong Kong for stuntmen to get given the chance to play major roles on screen with a lot of dialogue. And Brett Ratner saw Mark's performance in Gai3 Waak6, and he was like, "Boy, you're really a good actor," even though he'd worked with him on the Rush Hour movies, because Mark had been the main double for Chris Tucker on both the Rush Hour films. And on Money Talks before that. He wasn't really aware of Mark as an actor, just as a stunt guy. This sets up, I remember even when I first watched the film, when I had less of an understanding of Cantonese even than my poor Cantonese now, seeing this comedy of errors between Lei Hoi San and Jackie and totally getting why it was funny. This kind of play on words, and he's saying, you're not who you're claiming to be, and Jackie's like saying, well, no, I'm not, because I failed you, that's why you think I'm not that person, but really I am. And it worked very well, even given the rather the lacking in terms of the translation. The translation of the subtitles was a touch lacking back in the 80s when the film was actually first subtitled. But the tone of the scene, and maybe because of the performances, it really overcame a multitude of sins. And I think that these full-bore performances that you see in Hong Kong movies are another reason the films have travelled, because if you play the Hong Kong films where people have played more realistically, where they're actually playing scenes that are meant to be conveying everyday life in Hong Kong, those films don't communicate as well. But here, where everybody's larger than life, they really work, because you don't really need to understand the Chinese. You don't need to appreciate. You don't have to really like the bad dubbing. You don't have to understand the subtitles. You basically get the performances purely based on the visuals and the energy exchange between the players on screen. And this, of course, is something that's been mentioned not by myself but by other pundits in earlier years, have said that Hong Kong films, in a way, were like the last, and still are in a sense, the last of the great silent movies, because silent movies worked without dialogue, basically on expression and action and music, and that's why they communicated well. Nice, great shot, great thing here where Jackie turns the tables. Guys coming in still wearing their Bruce Lee cat suits and with these rifles. Actually, there's a scene cut from Project A Part 2 involving rifles where Jackie's character was meant to be brought out in front of a firing squad, but that didn't make the final cut. You can actually see some outtakes in the end of Project A Part 2 from that sequence, and another sequence of Jackie actually being held in jail. One day, someone's going to access all that stuff, and we'll have a chance to see all the famous lost scenes from Jackie's movies. But they're coming in and setting up, actually, one of the scenes that's about to be shown is another graphic example of violence. And of course, I get to watch the film and do the commentary before any editing or censorship, so I'm talking about scenes of violence. They may indeed be cut, so if they are, please forgive me. But even here, this guy being shot at point-blank range. For a Jackie film, it's relatively unusual, because he always has a big thing about no blood, no violence. This isn't the shot I'm talking about, but there's one coming up which is a knife technique. Obviously was dummied up with fake chest and a knife going into it. But for a Jackie movie, would be really quite something. There's a miniatures being blown up actually on a stretch of water. They're not actually full-size vessels. But again, a major step forward in terms of the production values for a Hong Kong action movie. And a rare example of the good guys using guns against the bad guys, normally the other way around in Hong Kong action films. Some very good wire pulls there, as you see stuntmen reacting to bullets and being pulled in the other direction. Used to be wires were really just used primarily for flying techniques in the classical kung fu movies. Here's the shot I was telling you about in this kind of rather realistic, more realistic knife fight. Stab in the foot, boom, and then the guy goes down, and the shot's coming up where Yuen Piu goes out, ooh, into the guy's chest. And again, those those are not things that you would normally see in a Jackie movie. So maybe Sammo's influence coming in, because Sammo tends to be much more brutal in his depiction of violence than Jackie. Jackie tends to play much more for a family audience. Now, there is an extended Taiwanese version of Project A, which has a longer fight at the end. It's not the big one-on-one set piece that I think Jackie's audience wants to see, but it did have more fighting, and particularly more fighting with the Korean super kicker, because, traditionally, audiences were waiting for the big final real showdown when it would be Jackie versus a single opponent, normally somebody who can kick better than him, because Jackie's not really known for being like an on-screen, as a great kicker on screen. And so for this film, they obviously wanted to go in a different direction and do some kind of composite sequence with the three brothers all fighting together against the Pirate King and his henchmen. Kwon Young-moon gets more to do in the Taiwanese print, and here he just gets a brief chance to show off his extraordinary kicking skills. They're really more interested now in this film not really in long combinations of movement, but in the specific impact shots where foot hits face. So that even though we don't see so much action, it's actually more lively on screen. The impact is greater because the specific shots, you get your money's worth from one specific shot of somebody kicking somebody else. Just to mention that Kwon Young-moon was actually knocked out in exactly the same way at the end of Dragon Lord. He gets a bottle smashed over his head. So maybe that was a nod to the earlier film. And Sammo gets in on the act with some of the reactions here. And again, he's got that little tunic on, so he's kind of padded anyway, but it's still quite an impact when he goes flying through the air as a response of these thrown grenades. And they're really moving away, evidently, here from the usual Hong Kong style of having two guys stand off at the end for the final real showdown. The martial arts interspersed with explosions and other stunt sequences, so that it's basically just martial arts is one flavour to the action sequence. These are incredibly tricky to do compared to a hand-to-hand martial arts fight between two people. Those, of course, have their own demands and their own complexity, but sequences like the ones where you see three people moving a shot at the same time with weapons, it's tough because if one person has their timing wrong, you have to start over. Whereas if you've got two people in a sequence, they can go off each other and get the rhythm down. They can go back and forward. And you see some of the old movies, people are doing like 30 movements in one take. This is a damn good Sammo Hung stunt here, and it really is him. He's pretty hard to double. Boom, as he goes off there through the stairs. Ouch! And down to the ground. And bear in mind, these skinny little blokes like Yuen Biao, when they go flying through the air, yes, it's going to hurt. But you get a 300-pounder like Sammo, and he's like kind of, when he hits an object, gravity's going to do its thing. And obviously, this is when he was a little bit younger than he is now. Great sequence there from Jackie. And that landing, bang, flat on the back. No padding, and he's down. And you see, those are the incidental shots people don't really appreciate with Jackie. They see him going off a clock tower and think, that's great. But those little numbers there, when you flip, boom, and you land on the ground, those are the ones where you pick up the nagging injuries that will potentially shorten your career. And the scenes that they really make a big song and dance out of, like the clock tower fall, yes, it's impressive and very brave, but in some ways less damaging to you, might sound strange, than these kind of short, sharp shocks that you experience. It's always the ones you don't see coming that injure you. That's what the stuntmen tell me anyway. I always used to... I've not done a huge amount of stunt work on screen, but I've taken my fair share of knocks from the lightning feet of some of the Hong Kong movie actors in my day, so I can appreciate the fact that the actual nuts and bolts of filmmaking is a lot harder than people give it credit for. And I've heard some martial arts people playing down the physical ability of martial art movie actors and saying that lacks reality. But I would say these guys take far more punishment in the course of a single film than most serious martial artists do in the course of their entire career. So, I guess people really don't need to criticize. And certainly Jackie and his cohorts don't criticize people for doing martial arts. Sammo up there, boom, down, ouch. Oh, damn. And that's got to hurt because, the floor, if it's sprung, it's only slightly sprung, and basically you're coming down. This wonderful set at the Golden Harvest Studios. How could they knock it down? When you think about the blood and sweat and tears shed on the boards of the Golden Harvest soundstage, how you can knock that place down to make room for housing, blocks of housing flats. Yes, people need to live, but come on, it's history. And here we are, the big finish. Nobody would have expected this. Rather than the big kung fu finish, they're doing the thing with the bomb. Boom, they're going to blow him up inside the carpetbaggers, and then gong. And this should have been I think, the last shot, them coming up. But being as it's a Jackie Chan movie, they wanted to come in and do the dessert. So you get the other sequence. They've obviously survived. The place is wrecked. And I think the three of them walking out, intact would have been as good an ending. It's a nice shot. You see the throne there in the foreground. Now this is kind of tagged on, which is the out at Clearwater Bay, the dessert shot where they've obviously redressed themselves on another day, come out on this yacht. All these tight shots here, which are very close to land, where you've got the principals doing the dialogue to show that they're kind of lost at sea. And then you get the finale, which is when you pull back and see that they're heading in the wrong direction. Plays back to something you see in the very beginning of the movie where they talk about the Coast Guard, the Marine Police always getting lost out on the open sea. So this is kind of dialogue thing. I mean, the typical Chinese New Year send-off, you want to leave the audience happy. And there you come back, and those are like doubles on the boat and the pirates being dragged behind. And careful not to show how near they are actually to land. That was actually shot at Clearwater Bay. And going into the outtake reel at the ending, or in this case, just the retread, basically, of the shots of the key moments of the film that you've just seen, so that people would go out after this Chinese New Year spectacular and tell their friends to go and see the movie, as indeed they did. As indeed should you, having spent your hard-earned on this wonderful DVD version of Project A. As I mentioned, truly groundbreaking film. It's been great watching it. I mean, sometimes you watch films for commentary and there's great lengths of time when it's a pressure to find stuff to talk about, and now we're getting into outtakes, which is a plus for this. One of the first times Jackie'd come in, and the first time Jackie'd come in and actually put outtakes on, something he got from Hal Needham on Cannibal Run. And there you see, just the simplest looking stunt coming off that chair on the bar, and it obviously caused some damage. There, Jackie's setting up a shot at Golden Harvest, the mock-up of the clock tower, setting up, and then we see shots here that were not used in the film for obvious reasons. He's going off the side there, and you just think, man, that really had to hurt. And I think probably that's the stunt for which he will always be remembered, is the clock tower gag. And everybody who talks about Jackie's stunt work always talks about it. That's the end. Bey Logan signing off. It's been a blast. Thank you. Goodbye.
La 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 la.